welcome to another Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation's Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions. It is a beautiful day for jazz, don't you agree?
It
and
is.
It's a special treat. One of our favorites, today's educator, is none other than Professor Brandon Robertson. And the topic is 2-5-1 progression part 2. So if you missed part 1, then you have to go back in the archives and check out that session, because I know it was amazing. Whether you're a beginner musician or you're a seasoned musician, you can always learn something from these sessions. And the great professor, he's blessed us with plenty of these sessions. But we hope you enjoyed today. And don't forget, you can go to our website, www.clearwaterjazz.com/education, and you could check out all of these free sessions. And we would love to get your feedback on it. You can email us at info@clearwaterjazz.com. But before we jump into it, we do want to thank our sponsors. So please be sure to check out the studio archive of past sessions. And that's brought to you by our friends over there, Blue Water Wealth Management and Stewart Partners, and Duke Energy as well. For the Young Lions podcast, wherever you stream. And that's brought to us by our friends over there at Marine Max Clearwater. And just search, you could type in Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions, and you can do that wherever you stream. So just a quick introduction. I know you've seen this awesome musician and professor and educator all over, but just in case you don't know, I want to introduce you to my friend, Professor Brandon Robertson. He is an Emmy-nominated music director, professional upright electric bassist, composer, and music educator, originally from none other than Tampa, Florida. He completed his Bachelor's of Arts in Music from Florida State University in 2009 and a Master's in Music and Jazz Studies in the spring of 2016. And, currently he's the director of jazz studies and the director of the FGCU basketball band at Florida Gulf Coast University in Fort Myers, Florida. In 2018, Brandon was nominated for an Emmy Award for Best Documentary for educational collegiate programs featuring the FGCU Jazz Ensemble. You got to go back and check that out. He's a prominent band leader. He's taken his band to multiple national tours, headlining. I mean, he's all over the country and he's known globally. I mean, just look at some of the names he played with. The world's famous Count Basie Orchestra led by Scotty Barnhart. I don't think we need to say any more after that. But just to name some more, vocalist Carmen Bradford, Jason Marcellus, Marcus Roberts, Marty Morrell, Wyclef Gordon, the name keeps going on. So before we get to it, do you have his music? Did you know he had music? I think he may be able to show you his music because he just recently released a debut album called Based on a True Story in the fall of 2019, which reached all the way to number 16 on the iTunes Top 200 release. Look at that beautiful artwork on that. So, without any further delay, Professor, the stage is all yours.
Oh, man, my dear friend, my brother from another mother. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I'm always humbled and gracious for all of the honorable mentions that you displayed to everyone. So thank you very much. And of course, thank you to the Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation. I love you guys dearly. We have grown to create a beautiful partnership. I like that we can continue this partnership. And of course, our main purpose on both ends is to educate the next generation in jazz. So let's jump right into it, everyone. For those of you who missed last week's session, it will be archived in the studio later on, and you'll be able to go back and watch that segment. And just to give you a brief synopsis of what I had covered, I talked about 2-5-1 progressions. Now, in jazz, it's usually you will see a minor 2 chord move into a dominant 5 chord, and it usually resolves to some type of 1 chord, okay, whether it's major or minor depending on the key signature. Now, or not necessarily, or key signature, and also whatever, how the harmony is moving. Okay, so we cover just the very basics, what they are, what is a 2/5, how it functions, and then I gave some examples of tunes that you will be able to hear that system move the way it should. And for instance, I mentioned Central Park West by John Coltrane, which is pretty much centered all around 2/5-1s, and then Clifford Brown's Joy Spring as well. You hear a lot of, pretty much that whole tune is centered and moving around a sequence of 2/5-1s. So these are just examples that I gave and just how to hear and understand them. Now, the second part, this is what we're gonna cover today. You know how to transcribe, you would know how to listen, and you would know how to take the information that you're learning, and then you start to apply that on tunes that you're learning. So you're learning just basic standards, you know, all the things you are, autumn leaves, satin all, etc. I'm just naming the very basic standards. Now, there's usually a disconnect when someone says to a young player, play the language, I need you to play the changes. And most of the time, this is not all the time, this is not all the case, but I would say about 30% of the time, some of that reference is that 2/5-1 progressions that are occurring within the tune. Now, for the younger players, the key thing is to understand that there are 2 things happening within the tune. You have functional harmony, and then you have the actual key center of the tune itself, the key signature, what the tune is in. So whether it can be in a minor or in its relative major, that's per se of the composer. But you have the functional harmony within that key center, which is the chord progressions and how those chord progressions are moving. So in order for you, the player, to understand how the tune is functioning and how it's moving, you need to hear what the key center is, right? So if I play something to this degree, let's see here. You have in that moment, that's the first first 4 chord progressions for all the things you are. Now, there was a 2/5-1 that resolved to a key center, to A flat, okay? Even though a lot of people will be like, well, it's an F minor. Well, if you think about the very last chord that it resolves on its relative major, the A flat. And so understanding this as a young player, those 2/5-1 help you navigate through the tune and helps you hear the points of resolution and the key centers within the key signature. So for instance, if I have a if I'm talking about autumn leaves, for instance, not autumn leaves, excuse me, all the things you are. I started on the minor 6, so I'm starting on an F minor. Then I move to a B flat minor to an E flat 7 that resolves to an A flat major. So that B flat minor is a minor 2. That E flat 7 is a dominant 5. That A flat major is the 1. That is one key center, right? Then it moves to a 4. It's a 4th apart, goes to a D flat chord. Then it does another 2/5 sequence to C major. Now at this point, it's resolving on the major 3rd of the key signature. So this is the disconnect that a lot of young musicians sometimes don't pay attention to. They'll see that 2/5 and like, oh, I'll just play do 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 do. Wait a minute, you gotta understand this is a key center here. This is a functional harmony that is being implied. So now instead of us just playing A flat, we're taking another key center, which is that's 2/5-1 to C major, and we're implying it into the tune. So when you're soloing, you want to make sure you are outlining that 2/5-1 language correctly so that when you resolve it, you can hear the resolution of that key center. And so a lot of times when I have my students soloing, I tell them, I say, guys, here's what I want you to do. I want you to play the triad of the minor 2. And then I want you to start on the 3rd of the 5 and go up every other note from there until you go to the 9. And so when I have them do this, what their ear is hearing is the continuance of those chords, of that phrase, of that harmony. And so when they resolve it on the 5th of the 1 chord. Now functionally they can hear the resolution. So when they start the solo, now whatever they're improvising, it's starting to make sense harmonically, because now they're functionally they're implying the correct functioning notes in the harmony to outline that 2-5-1 progression. So this is something that is very important for a young player to know. So number one, when you're studying 2-5-1 language, it's best that you practice them on the piano. Now, as I just demonstrated earlier, I kind of just played through a sequence. I make all of my bass students play through the circle of fifths, going through 2-5-1s. So if I start on a 2-5-1 to F. I'm sorry. Then I can go up and do another 2-5. Resolve it on E flat. Then you have this. So I make all of my bass students go through those 2-5 sequence so their ear can hear the resolutions. A lot of the times, your ear can't hear the resolution from the 5 to 1. Okay? And always know that the 3rd in that 5 chord is the leading tone. All right? So a lot of times, a lot of my students forget that when they're improvising. And I'm like, guys, there's 2 important notes that you really need to make sure that you hit correctly. And it's that 3rd and the 7th. All right? If you have a minor 7th and a dominant 7th, you need to imply a flat 7, not a major 7. If it don't indicate that in the chord, do not play that. If you see on the minor 2 chord that you have a minor 3rd, but when you go to a dominant chord, you have a major 3rd. Also, again, in basic theory, in terms of how points of resolution, that 3rd, that major 3rd, is your leading tone to resolving to whatever that 1 is. It leads up, okay? If any resolution you hear it as, okay? So it's very important when you're playing a 2-5-1, there are certain notes that you have to play correctly. You can't just blow through them, because what happens is you can actually change the functioning of that harmony. You might end up not resolving it correctly, and now you have suspended one note that might turn it into a sus chord because you don't have that 3rd that you've resolved it or you've never played it. So now it changes the functioning of that harmony. So it's very important when you're soloing and you're trying to learn how to improvise through those changes. Take your time, okay? Sit at the piano, play the chord first so you can hear it, all right? And practice moving through the circle of fifths, moving through that sequence. And once you get a grasp of it, then at that point, now this is implied to all instrumentalists, at that point, well, with the exception of piano, because that's your default instrument, but everybody else, at that point, then pick up your instrument, put on a metronome. I would say put it on at maybe 65, 70 BPM, slow. You want to start slow. Because the one important thing is the faster you play in 2-5s, if it sounds sloppy, it sounds like blah, 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 versus do ba do ba da ba do ba da. So if you don't practice articulating your rhythm, but then also making sure that whatever notes you are functioning, trying to outline are correct, then you won't get your point across. All right? So one other thing, or 2 other points too. There's 2 other points. Another thing about 2-5-1 progressions is a lot of our old standards are centered around these 2-5-1s. They kind of help keep the tunes together. They keep the actual functioning of the song together. And so knowing about functional harmony versus like chord, 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 chord. And so when you're improvising, let's say if you have one measure where you have two fives that are moving fast. So if it goes sort of like so how it's moving in pairs. And so if you hear it like that, I always tell my students to improvise, outline the first triad, but then when you get to the 5, you either come backwards, which will be 3-2-1 or 3-5-7. You keep going. However you hear it, and then when you resolve it, you can keep going again. So a lot of the times when you see 2 5s that are kind of what I like to call compressed into a measure, I have to look at, well, what's the next 2 measures coming up afterwards, so I know how to functionally resolve my phrasing. Because you don't want to sound like dooba 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 versus dooba 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 dooba. So what you did was you outlined the first 2 5, but then you continued your phrasing, which now you're implying functional harmony over a next pair of 2 5s to resolve it correctly. That's how I actually learned how to improvise when I was in college. And I had a great saxophone teacher that would make us do that. He would make us sing the intervals. You know how devastating that was to do at a very young player who's just starting to learn how to play jazz, and your teacher's asking you to try to sing out these 2 5s. But then what happened was, as a bass player, my ear would catch if the 2 5 sounded off, and I can fix it in real time. I can adjust real quickly because my vocalist is very, very attuned to what's happening. Like, I can hum it and I can hear it. I can feel it. I can feel that note, and then I know how to fix it. So that was a very great training that my teacher taught me. So one thing that I would encourage young players to do is sit at the piano and play out the triad. So if I'll just say a 2 5 to B flat. So 1 3 5. What was it? Yeah. 1 3 5 7. And then you go to the 5, and then you have 3 2 1 7, and then here's the B flat 3. Now I'm off right now. My voice is. I haven't had my coffee this morning, folks. Please forgive me. But practicing this will help your ear. It'll help it for horn players. You'll be able to kind of attune that note through your chest voice and through that air and hear it, be able to hear it and feel it. So every time you play it, you can feel that vibration of what that note feels like in tune. And just as on bass, if you play a note out of tune, you can feel the vibration of that note out of tune. You can feel that. So practicing these little exercises would not only kind of bring in and bridge the connection between how a 2 5 moves, but if you're playing it at a more faster tempo, then you won't slow down or get distracted by the fact that, oh my God, there's a lot of chord, versus outlining the 2 5 and then trying to continue the phrase. And that's how most great horn players approach it. I always think about when I listen to Charlie Parker playing Blues for Alice. And, during the bridge, it's 1 2 5, and then it goes to 1 chord. And then it goes down a whole step, 2 5 1. So it does the same thing, but the way how he outlines that phrase, he's just continuing the line. He's not actually dooba 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 dooba. He's not doing that. So I had to learn how to continue the phrase. So if for those of you who are trying to figure out, well, how do I connect my 2 5s better to understand that the harmony will continue, don't resolve on the root. So when you're playing the first minor 2, when you get to the dominant 5, start on the 3rd and either keep going 3 5 7 or 3 2 1 or go back down. So whichever way you go, you're either going to resolve on the third of that one chord or the fifth of that one chord. If you're ascending, you're going to resolve on the fifth. If you're descending, you're going to resolve on the third. So just understanding how to resolve a 2-5 and how to get in and out of the sequence will really dictate the harmony a lot clearer, and it will be a lot easier for you to facilitate through the changes without getting, lost or in the space. So yeah, that would conclude my portion of the 2-5-1, because it's a lot more in depth. There's a lot more to it, but that's just the very basic to get you started. And it would be very helpful for everybody to listen to a lot of records. You will catch, the more you listen, you'll start to understand how 2-5s function. So when you play it and you'll hear how other jazz musicians approach it, it'll be a lot easier to your ear.
Awesome. So I noticed you mentioned doing a lot of singing, listening, playing it out on the piano, and taking your time. So how much time would you say it would take the average, maybe let's say middle school, high school level? What could they do to just start off with the basics? Like, who could they listen to that they wouldn't get lost in trying to figure this out? Or is there a resource? I know we have iReal Pro and all these things like that. What would be a good resource for them to pick up to say, I want to see it and hear it at the same time? Or what would be a good artist that could simplify it? Because I know you said, we talked about Charlie Parker, we talked about all these different musicians. They may get lost in hearing some of that. Like, you listen to Dizzy, you're not going to really home in on some of this as quickly.
I always, it's funny. That's a great question, because it's a reason why band directors and, our elders, who, we respect dearly, they always refer us to Miles Davis Kind of Blue. And there's a reason. There's a reason why a record like that is so profound for a young musician to know, because that is probably the easiest recording to hear harmony in its simplest form, right? So you take a tune like So What, which is very ambiguous in a sense, because it's only just two Dorian chords, and you take a tune like Flamenco Sketches, which is super open, but then you take the simplicity of how he plays Freddie Freeloader, but then you take the really openness and the beautifulness of the Ballad of Blue and Green. So there's like these collection of variety of styles that Miles was able to encompass from the earlier years to up until 1959. So I always say, to answer your question, I would always refer a middle school student and a beginning high school student to Kind of Blue, because I was in ninth grade when I first got introduced to that record. And up until that point, my grandparents played jazz in my household, but it was Jackie McLean, and it was Ramsey Lewis, and it was Count Basie, and Thad. It was like things that were like big band stuff, and they were really into Sonny, and so it was just things that were kind of over my head. That I'm like, man, this is jazz. This is crazy. But then I heard Kind of Blue, and I was like, oh. And it was the first time hearing a bass player like just play something real simple where I can actually hear what he's doing. I can hear what Paul Chambers was playing. So to answer your question, I will always refer a student to that recording. Now, in terms of resources, there is iReal Pro for a student, like a middle school student, to just start on and have a backtrack playing where they can just practice, because you can slow down the tempo, you can transpose the key, they can actually put the changes in their transposed instrument. So they have an E flat chart, they have B flat charts, they have concert charts, C charts. You can also change the key signature of the chart itself. So if you want to play it in a different key. So that is a good resource for someone at that level to start with. I would say high school, maybe Jamie Abersol, only because the Jamie Abersol actually has the changes written out at the bottom. They have the backtracks, they have the correct melodies written out. So just giving them proper introductions. There's another website called learnjazzstandards.com that I've used in the past. It's a lot of tutorial videos on just, how to start, improvising, how to start listening, how to understand basic triads and what is a chord, what are the chord symbols. It goes through different tutorial videos like that. So that's called learnjazzstandards.com. So those are some of the resources.
I hope everybody took a lot of notes. You dropped websites, apps, albums, you name it. You put it all out there today. And I love the fact that we archive this because, you named out the notes of the chords and things like that. And it's going to take time. And I just want to remind everybody it's not an overnight process. But if you do spend the quality time, it's going to pay off greatly in your improvisation. And I think musicians can hear if you're putting in that due diligence to know these chord structures and know the ins and outs of it. It clearly shows. So we want to thank you, Professor, for another awesome session.
Yeah.
I mean, what can we say? I mean, it's been awesome. You always dropping some great knowledge. We know that we can see you out in the community playing. We see you on major stages. I mean, you name it, you're out there doing it, and you're here educating and helping us out here at Clearwater Jazz. So we want to remind everybody that, if you have any feedback, we would love to hear from you. Just email us at info@clearwaterjazz.com. And also check out the past sessions, clearwaterjazz.com/education. And we're going to see you on the next one, guys. Just keep telling everybody about the great things you're hearing here, and keep on swinging. Keep on
swinging. Have a good one, everybody. I'll talk to y'all later.
All right, bye-bye.